Joy Behar agreed with Larry David. On national television. On July 4th. And the entire studio froze. It happened in the second segment. The panel had just finished discussing the president's speech from the night before. The one with the fireworks over Washington. The one where he declared that America was back. Everyone had said the expected things. It was inspiring. It was unifying. It was what the country needed. The audience clapped. The producers relaxed. The show was on track. And then the conversation turned to patriotism. What does it mean to love your country in 2026? Sunny Hostin gave a thoughtful answer about the complexity of being a black woman in America and loving a country that had enslaved her ancestors. The audience nodded along. This was familiar territory. Nuanced. Safe. Then Joy leaned forward. She adjusted her microphone. She glanced down at something in front of her. Maybe the newspaper she had been reading earlier. Maybe just her own thoughts collected into words. And she spoke. You know, I have been thinking about something. And I want to say it because I think it matters. We are all sitting here talking about how great America is, and there are great things about this country. I have had an incredible life here. Opportunities one never would have had anywhere else. But I keep coming back to something Larry David said a couple years ago. About being embarrassed to be American. And you know what? I agree with him. The words hung in the air. Heavy. Immovable. The audience made a sound that was not quite a gasp and not quite a murmur. Something in between. Something involuntary. The kind of sound people make when they are not sure what they just heard, but they know it was important. Whoopi Goldberg blinked. It was a small thing. A fraction of a second. But anyone who has watched Whoopi for years knows that she does not blink when she is comfortable. She blinks when she is recalibrating. When her brain is moving faster than the conversation. When she is trying to figure out what to do next. Sunny Hostin's eyebrows rose. Just slightly. Just enough to register surprise. Alyssa Farah Griffin opened her mouth and then closed it. The former White House communications director who had sparred with Joy on countless occasions. The conservative voice at the table. She was speechless. For a full second. Maybe two. Which for Alyssa was an eternity. Joy did not stop. She did not soften. She did not walk it back. There are days, not every day, but some days when I am embarrassed. When I look at what is happening in this country. How we treat each other. The division. The anger. The way we have stopped listening. Yeah. I am embarrassed. And I think it is okay to say that. I think being honest about what is wrong is part of loving something enough to want it to be better. Whoopi stepped in. Her voice was controlled, but there was an edge underneath. The edge of someone who moderates live television and knows when a moment is slipping beyond the planned segment. Okay. Let us unpack that. Because I think there is a difference between being embarrassed and being critical. And I want to make sure we understand which one we are talking about. It was a lifeline. A professional moderator's lifeline. A chance for Joy to clarify. To soften. To say she meant critical, not embarrassed. To walk the statement back to safer ground. Joy did not take it. No, Whoopi. I said what I said. I am not walking it back. There are things about this country right now that are embarrassing. Period. And I think more people feel that way than want to admit it. They just cannot say it because they are afraid of being called unpatriotic or anti-American or whatever label people want to throw around. The audience shifted. Some people clapped. Loud. Aggressive. The kind of clapping that says finally someone said it. Other people sat in stony silence. Arms crossed. Faces tight. One woman in the third row stood up. She was wearing an American flag scarf around her neck. She walked out. The cameras did not catch it. But everyone in the studio saw it. Alyssa found her voice. And it was tight. Controlled but tight. The voice of someone who was genuinely upset and trying very hard to sound professional. Joy, I have to push back on this. I really do. On July 4th of all days. America's 250th birthday. When we are supposed to be celebrating what unites us. You are telling millions of people watching that you are embarrassed by the country they love. That is going to hurt people. Genuinely hurt people. People who have sacrificed for this country. People who have family members who died for this country. People who believe in the promise of America even when it falls short. Joy looked at Alyssa. And there was something in her expression. Not anger. Not defensiveness. Something older. Something tired. Alyssa, I am not saying people should not love their country. I am saying that loving something does not mean pretending it is perfect. I am 83 years old. I have lived through a lot of American history. Some of it beautiful. Some of it ugly. And I have earned the right to say when I think we are falling short. And right now we are falling short. And I am embarrassed by it. And I refuse to apologize for feeling that way. The studio erupted. Not in one voice but in many. Cheering and booing and confused murmuring all at once. The careful choreography of a daytime talk show audience dissolved completely. The applause signs were useless. The warm-up comedian's instructions to be supportive and enthusiastic were forgotten. What was left was raw. Real. Unscripted. Sunny tried to bridge the gap. Her voice was calm but urgent. The voice of someone who could see where this was heading and wanted to steer it somewhere productive. I understand what you are saying, Joy, I really do, but I think it is important to distinguish between being embarrassed by certain actions or moments and being embarrassed to be American. Because the second one is an identity statement. That is different from saying I am embarrassed by what my country did on a particular day. Alyssa nodded vigorously. That is exactly my point. Thank you, Sunny. There is a difference between critique and identity. And when you say I am embarrassed to be American, you are not critiquing a policy. You are rejecting an identity. And that is what people are reacting to. Joy did not back down. Sunny, I hear you, but here is the thing. When the things America is doing become so consistent, so fundamental to how the country operates, at that point it is not just about individual actions anymore. It is about identity. It is about who we are as a nation. And right now I look at who we are as a nation and parts of it embarrass me deeply. And I do not think saying that makes me unpatriotic. I think it makes me honest. Sarah Haynes spoke for the first time. She had been quiet throughout the exchange. Watching. Processing. Now she leaned in and her voice was the voice of someone trying to find a path through the wreckage. I think what Joy is trying to say, and Joy, correct me if I am wrong, is that patriotism and criticism are not mutually exclusive. You can love your country and still want it to be better. You can celebrate July 4th and still acknowledge that we have work to do. That we are not a perfect nation and we have never been a perfect nation, but we are always striving. Joy nodded. But she did not soften. I am not trying to make anyone feel bad about loving their country. What I am saying is that blind patriotism is not real love. Real love sees the flaws and says, let us fix them. Real love does not look away when things are broken. Real love does not pretend everything is fine when it is not fine. And I look around right now and things are not fine. The way we talk to each other. The way we treat each other. The anger. The division. The refusal to even listen to someone who disagrees with you. That is not the America I grew up believing in. And yes, I am embarrassed by it. And I am not going to pretend I am not. Whoopi stepped in again. Her voice had shifted. She was no longer trying to moderate her way out of a controversy. She was leaning into it. Recognizing that this moment was bigger than the segment. All right, let me say something. Because I have been sitting here listening and I think there is something important happening right now that we should not miss. Joy is expressing something real. Something that a lot of people feel but are afraid to say. And Alyssa, you are expressing something real too. Something that a lot of people feel about wanting to protect the idea of America as something worth celebrating. And both of those things can be true at the same time. That is what this country is supposed to be. A place where we can have this conversation without tearing each other apart. Alyssa shook her head slightly. Whoopi, I respect that. And I respect Joy's right to feel however she feels. But I also think words matter and context matters. And when you go on national television on July 4th and say you are embarrassed to be American, you are giving ammunition to every person in the world who wants to tear this country down. You are validating the worst criticisms of our enemies. And you are doing it on a day when families are sitting at home trying to feel good about their country. Trying to teach their kids to be proud of where they come from. And I think there is a time and a place. And maybe this was not it. Joy's response was immediate. Sharp. But not cruel. With all due respect, Alyssa, the idea that there is a time and a place for honest criticism is how you silence people. Is how you maintain a status quo that is not working for huge portions of the population. If we cannot talk about what is wrong on July 4th, when can we talk about it? December 3rd, when nobody is paying attention. The whole point of a day like today is to reflect on what America means. And reflection includes the hard parts. It includes the parts we are not proud of. It includes the parts that embarrass us. If we only allow celebration and never allow critique, then we are not actually honoring the country. We are honoring a fantasy version of it. The audience was fractured now. Not metaphorically. Physically. People in the front rows were arguing with each other. A man in a veteran's hat was shaking his head so vigorously that his wife put a hand on his arm to calm him. A young woman with dyed hair and a nose ring was nodding so hard she looked like she might hurt her neck. The camera operators did not know where to point. The director in the control room was making split-second decisions about which reactions to show and which to hide. Backstage, the phones were ringing. The network was calling. Someone from ABC Corporate was on the line asking what the hell was happening and why nobody had cut to commercial. The executive producer was sweating through his shirt. The segment producer was timing how long they had been in this conversation, and the answer was too long and also not long enough. This was the most compelling television The View had produced in years, and everyone in that control room knew it. They also knew it might cost them their jobs. Whoopi made a decision. She looked directly at the camera. All right, we are going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we are going to continue this conversation. Because I think it is important. And I think we need to hear from all of you at home too. So do not go anywhere. The theme music played. The lights shifted. The floor director signaled commercial. And in the sudden quiet of the studio, 5 women sat at a table not looking at each other. The audience sat in confused silence. No one knew what was going to happen next. During the break, Joy and Alyssa did not speak. Witnesses said Whoopi and Sunny had a quiet conversation at one end of the table, their heads close together, their expressions serious. Sarah moved to sit next to Joy and put a hand on her arm. A gesture of support. Or maybe of comfort. Joy sat very still. Her face was calm. She did not look like a woman who was worried about the consequences. She looked like a woman who had finally said something she had been holding in for a very long time. The clip was already online. The digital team had posted it during the break. Or maybe someone in the audience had recorded it on their phone and uploaded it. It did not matter. The result was the same. By the time the show came back from commercial, the clip had been viewed hundreds of thousands of times. The hashtag Embarrassed American was trending. And the conversation that had started on a daytime talk show was now happening everywhere. When the cameras came back on, the energy had shifted completely. The celebratory July 4th atmosphere was gone. What remained was something heavier. Something more serious. 5 women sitting at a table knowing they were now part of a national conversation that was far bigger than their show. Whoopi opened the second half with a statement. Welcome back. We are continuing our conversation about patriotism and critique and what it means to love your country. And I want to start by saying that what just happened here is exactly what this show was created for. Real conversations about real issues where real women with real opinions can disagree and still sit at the same table and still respect each other. Joy Behar has spent over 2 decades on this show. She has earned the right to speak her mind. And whether you agree with what she said or not, that right is what America is supposed to be about. Alyssa nodded, but her jaw was still tight. Whoopi, I agree with that completely. And I want to be clear that I am not questioning Joy's right to say what she said. I am questioning the impact. The impact of saying it on this particular day in this particular way. And I want to bring in a perspective that I think is getting lost. The perspective of people who genuinely love this country. Not blindly. Not ignorantly. But genuinely. And who feel like every time someone with a platform says they are embarrassed by America, it chips away at something essential. Something that holds us together. Joy leaned in. And this time her voice was different. Less defiant. More curious. Alyssa, I want to ask you something. And I am genuinely asking. Not trying to trap you. Do you think America has ever done things that should embarrass us? Alyssa paused. This was a genuine question and she treated it as such. Of course I do. Every country has moments in its history that are shameful. Slavery is shameful. The treatment of Native Americans is shameful. Internment camps are shameful. There are plenty of things in American history that should embarrass any decent person. Then why is it okay to be embarrassed by things that happened in the past but not by things that are happening right now? Because there is a difference between acknowledging shameful moments and adopting shame as an identity. There is a difference between saying America has done bad things and saying I am embarrassed to be American. One is about history. The other is about belonging. But what if the bad things are not just history? What if they are happening right now? And what if they are not just isolated incidents but patterns? Systems. Ways of being that have persisted for generations. At what point does acknowledging shameful moments become acknowledging a shameful identity? The studio went quiet. This was the philosophical core of the entire argument. And everyone in the room knew it. Sunny stepped in. And when she spoke, it was not just as a pain list. It was as someone who had wrestled with this question her entire life. As a black woman in America, I have to hold both things at the same time all the time. I have to hold the reality that my ancestors were enslaved by this country. And I have to hold the reality that this country also produced the Civil Rights Movement and the Voting Rights Act and the 14th Amendment and Barack Obama. I have to hold the reality that this country has been a source of profound trauma for people who look like me. And I have to hold the reality that this country is also my home and I love it and I want to make it better. That tension. That holding of opposites. That is what it means to be a black patriot. And I think what Joy is expressing is a version of that tension that more and more Americans are feeling regardless of their race or background. Alyssa's voice softened. I hear that, Sunny. And I think that is beautifully put. And I want to acknowledge that my experience as a white woman means I have not had to hold that same tension in the same way. And maybe that is part of why Joy's comment landed differently for me. Because I have not had to wrestle with my relationship to this country in the same way that people of color have had to. But I still think there is value in aspiration. In holding up the ideal even when we fall short of it. In saying this is what we are striving for even when we are not there yet. And I worry that when we lead with embarrassment, when that becomes the dominant narrative, we lose the aspiration. Joy nodded slowly. And then she said something that surprised everyone. I understand that concern, Alyssa. I really do. And I want to say something that maybe I should have said earlier. I am not embarrassed by America, the idea. I am not embarrassed by the promise of this country. By the ideals of equality and justice and freedom that we claim to stand for. What embarrasses me is the gap between the promise and the reality. The size of that gap. And our collective willingness to tolerate it. That is what embarrasses me. Not the flag. Not the national anthem. Not the men and women who sacrificed everything for this country. But the fact that we so often fail to live up to what those symbols represent. That is what embarrasses me. And I think Larry David was saying the same thing in his own neurotic Larry David way. The audience responded differently this time. Less explosion. More absorption. People were leaning forward. Listening. Processing. The tone had shifted from confrontation to something closer to understanding. Whoopi seized the moment. That is the conversation right there. That is the nuance that we do not usually get in a 30-second clip or a headline or a tweet. And that is why having this conversation matters. Because Joy just said something that I think most Americans would actually agree with if they took the time to really listen. Most Americans are embarrassed by the gap between what we say we are and what we actually are. Most Americans want that gap to close. Most Americans love the idea of America even when they are frustrated by the reality of America. And those two things can exist at the same time. Sarah nodded. I think what I am taking away from this is that the phrase embarrassed to be American means different things to different people. And maybe we need to be more specific about what we mean when we say it. Because I do not think Joy meant I am ashamed of my country and I wish I were from somewhere else. I think she meant I am frustrated and disappointed by the state of my country and I want better. And those are very different things. Joy nodded. That is exactly what I meant, Sarah. And maybe I should have been clearer about that. But sometimes on live television you say things in the moment and you do not get to go back and add footnotes and citations. And I said what I said because I was feeling it. And I meant it. But the meaning behind it was never I hate America or I am not proud to live here. It was I want my country to be better than this. And right now it is not. And that is embarrassing to me. Alyssa exhaled. The tension in her shoulders visibly dropped. I appreciate that clarification, Joy. And I think I can find common ground with you on that. Because I want America to be better too. I think we probably disagree on what better looks like and how to get there. But the desire for improvement. The refusal to be satisfied with mediocrity or injustice. That is something we share. And in that moment something shifted. The crackling tension that had filled the studio for the past 20 minutes began to ease. Not because anyone had won the argument. But because both sides had moved from positions to understanding. From declarations to dialogue. Whoopi turned to the audience. All right, I want to hear from all of you. Because I know a lot of you have thoughts about this. Who wants to share? What followed was extraordinary. A military veteran stood up. A man in his 60s with close-cropped grey hair and a shirt that said US Army. He spoke slowly. Deliberately. I served this country for 22 years. I served in Iraq and Afghanistan. I lost friends. Good men and women who believed in what they were fighting for. And I want to say something that might surprise you. I agree with Joy. Not with the way she said it maybe. But with the sentiment. The most patriotic thing you can do for your country is tell it when it is wrong. When it is failing. When it is not living up to its promises. That is what service means. Not blind obedience. Not flag waving. Service. Real service. That means wanting your country to be the best version of itself. Even when that means acknowledging that right now it is not. The audience applauded. Not everyone. But many. Joy nodded at him with visible respect. A young woman stood up next. She was in her early 20s. First-generation American. Her parents had come from Guatemala 30 years ago. I understand what everyone is saying. I really do. But when I hear someone say they are embarrassed to be an American, it hurts. Because my parents risked everything to come here. They believed in the American dream. And they taught me to believe in it too. And I know this country is not perfect. I know there are problems. Huge problems. But for people like my family, this country represents hope. And when people on TV say they are embarrassed by it, it feels like they are dismissing that hope. Like they are saying it does not matter. Alyssa nodded. That is exactly what I was trying to say. Thank you for sharing that. Joy looked at the young woman. And her expression was gentle. I hear you. And I want you to know that what your parents did was extraordinary. Truly. The courage it takes to leave everything behind and start over in a new country. That is incredible. And your family is part of what makes America great. But I also think that the hope your parents felt and that you feel is precisely why we should demand more from this country. Because hope is not just about being grateful for what you have. It is about believing things can be better. And working to make them better. And sometimes that means saying the hard things. I am not dismissing your family's hope. I am saying that hope should drive us to demand more from our country. Not less. The young woman nodded slowly. She did not look entirely convinced. But she was thinking. Anyone could see she was thinking. A middle-aged man stood up. He had a flag pin on his lapel. His voice was calmer than his appearance suggested. I understand where Joy is coming from. But I wish he had chosen different words. Because the words matter. When you say I am embarrassed to be American, you are saying something about your identity. Your belonging. And that is different from saying I am embarrassed by specific actions or policies. I know Joy clarified what she meant. But the first thing she said is what will make headlines. It is what will be clipped and shared. And the clarification will not get nearly as much attention. And that is a problem. Because the people who only see the clip will think she hates America. And that is not what she said. But it is what people will hear. Whoopi nodded. That is a fair point. And it is one of the challenges of doing live television. You cannot control how people will take your words once they leave your mouth. Especially in the age of social media when everything is reduced to the most inflammatory version of itself. And Joy, I think this gentleman's point is worth considering. The words do matter. Joy acknowledged it. I agree. And maybe I should have been more careful. But I also think we have become so afraid of the wrong words being clipped and weaponized that we have stopped saying anything real at all. We have become so cautious, so focus grouped, so terrified of backlash that we have stopped speaking from the heart. And that is not who I am. That has never been who I am. And at my age I am not going to start now. So yes, the words matter. But so does authenticity. And I chose authenticity. And I stand by it. The audience applauded. This time more than before. The balance had shifted. Not because everyone agreed with Joy. But because they respected her refusal to pretend. Her willingness to be real. Even when real was messy. A retired teacher stood up. A woman in her 70s with silver hair and glasses on a chain. I taught American history for 35 years. And I want to say something about this idea of embarrassment. When my students would learn about Jim Crow or Japanese internment or the Trail of Tears, they would often say, "Miss, why are we learning about this if America is supposed to be the good guys?" And I would tell them that we learn about these things precisely because America is not always the good guys. Because we have made terrible mistakes. Because we have failed to live up to our own ideals over and over again. And the only way we ever improve is by acknowledging those failures. By feeling embarrassed enough to change. So when I hear Joy say she is embarrassed to be American, what I hear is someone who is still capable of feeling the moral weight of her country's failures. And that is not unpatriotic. That is the most patriotic thing there is. The audience erupted. This time it was not mixed. It was not fractured. It was overwhelming. The applause rolled through the studio like thunder. Even Alyssa was clapping. Even the people who had booed earlier were nodding. Whoopi let the applause go on for a long moment. Then she raised her hand. All right. I think we have covered a lot of ground today. And I want to thank everyone in this audience for being part of this conversation. This is what The View is supposed to be. Not just a show where we argue, but a show where we actually listen. Where we hear each other. Where we find the common ground beneath the disagreement. Joy said something today that sparked a lot of reactions. And we sat with those reactions and worked through them. And that is rare. That is valuable. And I am proud of everyone at this table and in this audience for doing that work. Sunny added one final thought. I want to say something about Larry David. Because his name came up and then we kind of moved on. But the reason his comment resonated with Joy and with so many people is because Larry David represents something specific. He represents the person who says the uncomfortable thing at the wrong moment. He has made an entire career out of that. And when he said he was embarrassed to be American, he was not trying to start a national conversation. He was just being Larry David. Speaking his truth in the most awkward possible way. And Joy, by referencing him, was doing something similar. She was speaking her truth. And yes, it was awkward. And yes, it was uncomfortable. And yes, it sparked a lot of reactions. But that is what honest people do. They speak their truth. Even when it is messy. Even when it is poorly timed. Even when it makes other people uncomfortable. And I think we need more of that. Not less. The show ended a few minutes later. The theme music played. The credits rolled. The audience filed out into the July afternoon, still buzzing with the energy of what they had witnessed. The panelists gathered their things and went their separate ways. Joy walked to her dressing room with the same calm she had worn throughout the entire broadcast. She had said what she said. She had meant it. And she was not sorry. But the story was only beginning. Because while the studio conversation had found its resolution, the outside world was just getting started. The clip had already been viewed millions of times. The hashtag was trending in multiple countries. News outlets were already writing their headlines. Pundits were already drafting their hot takes. And the machinery of outrage was already grinding into motion. Larry David was contacted by reporters. His response was classic Larry David. He said he had not watched the clip because he does not watch The View. He said he was glad someone agreed with him, but he did not really want to be involved in any controversy. And then he asked if anyone knew a good place to get pastrami in Santa Monica. Joy released a statement later that afternoon. It was brief. Unapologetic. She said she stood by what she said, and she also stood by the clarification she offered on the show. She loved America. She had always loved America. Wanting it to be better was not the same as wanting it to fail. Anyone who watched the whole conversation knew that. Anyone who only watched the clip, she could not help. The statement became its own controversy. Some people praised it as refreshingly direct. Others criticized it as dismissive. The phrase "I cannot help you" became a meme. It was printed on t-shirts. It was turned into reaction GIFs. It was weaponized by both sides of the debate. Alyssa Farah Griffin posted her own thoughts. She said she disagreed with Joy on many things, but she respected her right to speak her mind. She said the conversation they had was uncomfortable and messy, and exactly the kind of thing the country needed more of, not less. She said she was proud to sit at a table where women could disagree without dehumanizing each other. Sunny Hostin wrote a longer reflection. She talked about the experience of being a black patriot. About holding love and critique in the same hand. About the generation of Americans who were tired of choosing between blind celebration and outright rejection. Her post was shared hundreds of thousands of times. Many people said it articulated something they had felt for years but never found words for. Whoopi did not post anything. She rarely does. She let the episode speak for itself. The ratings for that July 4th broadcast were the highest The View had seen in over 2 years. The clip continued to circulate for weeks. It was analyzed on cable news. It was debated on podcasts. It was assigned in college courses as an example of modern political discourse. Professors used it to teach about framing and narrative and the gap between intent and impact. Joy did not apologize. Not then. Not later. Not ever. She returned to the show the following Monday and she was the same as she had always been. Opinionated. Unfiltered. Unbothered. When asked about the controversy, she shrugged and said she had been through worse and would probably go through worse again. That was the job. That was the life. You say what you think and some people cheer and some people boo, and then you come back tomorrow and do it again. The moment faded eventually. As all moments do. New controversies arose. New clips went viral. New hashtags trended. The news cycle moved on. But something lingered. A question that did not have an easy answer. What does it actually mean to love a country? Is love celebration or is love critique? Is love gratitude or is love aspiration? Can you be embarrassed by something and still claim to love it? Can you be disappointed by your country and still belong to it? These questions did not begin on July 4, 2026, and they did not end there either. They are older than the country itself. They were debated in the founding era by men who argued about what kind of nation they were creating. They were debated during the Civil War when the country nearly destroyed itself over the question of what America was supposed to be. They were debated during the Civil Rights Movement and the Vietnam War and every moment of national reckoning since. Joy Behar did not answer these questions on that July morning. She did not try to. She simply spoke her truth and let the chips fall where they would. She said out loud what millions of Americans had felt but kept to themselves. And in doing so she opened a door. A door to a conversation that was uncomfortable and messy and necessary. A conversation about what it means to love a country that so often falls short of its own ideals. A conversation about whether embarrassment can coexist with love or whether it signals something closer to abandonment. The conversation is not over. It will never be over. Because America is not finished. It is still being made. Still being argued over. Still being defined. Every generation gets to decide what patriotism means. Every citizen gets to decide how they relate to their country. Joy Behar made her choice on July 4, 2026. She chose honesty over comfort. Authenticity over safety. Her truth over the polite fictions that so often pass for patriotism. She chose to say the quiet part out loud. And the country heard her. And the country argued. And the country kept going. Because that is what America does. It argues and it keeps going. It fails and it keeps trying. It embarrasses itself and it keeps striving to be better. And maybe that striving is the point. Maybe the embarrassment is not a rejection of America but proof that you still believe in it enough to be disappointed when it falls short. Maybe the people who are most embarrassed are the ones who love their country the most. Because they are the ones who still expect it to be better. Who still believe it can be better. Who still care enough to demand better. Joy Behar said she was embarrassed to be an American. And in saying so she demonstrated something profound. She demonstrated that she still believed America was worth being embarrassed about. Because if you did not love something you would not care when it failed. If you did not believe in its promise you would not notice when it broke its promises. If you had given up on the country entirely you would feel nothing at all. Embarrassment requires investment. It requires hope. It requires the belief that things could be different than they are. And on July 4, 2026, an 83-year-old woman sat at a table on national television and told the world that she was still invested. She was still hopeful. She still believed that America could be better. And that belief, that stubborn, unkillable belief, was the most American thing about her.